The chandelier sparkled overhead, casting golden light over the guests at the lavish gala. Laughter and the clink of crystal glasses filled the air, masking the undercurrent of tension that hung like an invisible thread. Sylvia, poised and elegant in her emerald green gown, seemed the epitome of sophistication. But those who knew her well could see the telltale stiffness in her smile. Her husband, Richard, stood by her side, commanding the room with the ease of a seasoned host. A successful architect, he exuded confidence, his charisma drawing people in like moths to a flame. By his side was Dr. Evelyn Hart, the family's trusted physician. Evelyn was a striking woman with sharp features softened by a warm smile. She had been a close friend to both Sylvia and Richard for years, or so Sylvia had believed. As the evening unfolded, Sylvia moved through the crowd, greeting guests and exchanging pleasantries. Yet her mind raced, replaying the discovery she had made just days before. A forgotten phone left unlocked on the kitchen counter had revealed a series of intimate messages. Richard's words, unmistakably passionate, sent to Evelyn. Sylvia's heart had shattered in that moment, but as the days passed, her sorrow turned to resolve. Tonight she would expose the betrayal, not in anger, but with the icy precision of a woman who had been wronged. The gala reached its peak as Richard stepped onto the small stage, raising his glass to deliver a toast. To love, friendship, and the shared successes we celebrate tonight, he began, his voice steady and confident. The crowd erupted in applause. Sylvia waited until the applause subsided before stepping forward, her own glass raised. "If I may, Richard," she said, her voice sweet but carrying a subtle edge, "I'd like to propose a toast as well." Richard hesitated, his smile faltering. "Of course, darling," he said, stepping aside. Sylvia turned to the guests, her gaze sweeping over them like a queen addressing her court. "To trust," she began, her voice ringing clear, "the foundation of every relationship, the something we build, nurture, and cherish. And, when broken, it cannot be mended." The room grew still, the chatter fading as guests sensed the shift in the atmosphere. Sylvia's eyes locked onto Evelyn's. "I'd especially like to toast Dr. Hart, who has been an invaluable part of our lives." Evelyn's smile faltered, her hand tightening around her glass. Richard took a step forward, his face pale. "Sylvia, perhaps this isn't the time." "No, Richard," Sylvia interrupted, her voice sharpening. "This is the perfect time. Dr. Hart has provided us with more than just medical care. She's shown us the true meaning of intimacy." A murmur rippled through the crowd, gasps and whispers spreading like wildfire. Richard's face flushed, his carefully crafted composure crumbling. Evelyn's expression hardened, her polished demeanor giving way to a flicker of panic. "Darling," Richard began, his voice barely above a whisper, "let's discuss this privately." Sylvia turned to him, her eyes cold. "Privately? You mean like the private moments you've shared with Evelyn?" The room fell silent. All eyes were on the trio now, the gala forgotten. Richard opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Evelyn set her glass down with trembling hands. "I trusted you," Sylvia said, her voice steady despite the tears glistening in her eyes. "Both of you. And this," she gestured at the stunned crowd, "is what betrayal looks like." The silence was deafening. Sylvia set her glass down with deliberate care and walked out, her head held high. Behind her, the gala dissolved into chaos as whispers erupted and the facade of perfection shattered, leaving Richard and Evelyn to face the storm they had created. The following morning, the sun rose on the sprawling city, but the light brought no comfort to Richard or Evelyn. The events of the previous night were already circulating through their social circles, the tale growing sharper with each retelling. Sylvia, however, was uncharacteristically calm. She sat in the sunlit kitchen of her penthouse apartment, the scent of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. In front of her was a small leather journal, its worn pages filled with careful notes. She wasn't finished yet. When Richard stormed into the apartment later that morning, his face was a mask of fury and desperation. "Sylvia," he barked, slamming the door behind him. "What the hell were you thinking?" She didn't flinch. Instead, She turned to face him with an almost serene expression. "Good morning, Richard. Coffee? Don't play games with me," he snapped, his voice rising. "Do you have any idea what you've done? My reputation, our reputation, our reputation?" She interrupted, her voice cold and measured. "You destroyed that the moment you decided to take our family doctor to bed." Richard's face reddened, and he raked a hand through his hair. "It wasn't like that. It wasn't serious." Sylvia stood, her calm demeanor vanishing. "Don't insult me, Richard. Months of messages, secret rendezvous, lies upon lies. How dare you reduce it to not serious?" He opened his mouth to respond, but Sylvia raised a hand, silencing him. "Save it. I've heard enough of your excuses. You should be grateful I didn't air out every detail last night." Richard's anger gave way to unease. "What do you mean?" She picked up the journal from the table and flipped it open, revealing pages of dates, times, and details. "I know everything, Richard. Every text, every meeting, every lie you told me. And Evelyn, our dear, trusted Evelyn, wasn't as careful as she thought. I have proof of her other indiscretions, too." Richard stared at the journal, his bravado crumbling. "Sylvia, what do you want?" She closed the journal and looked at him with a steely gaze. "I want you to feel what it's like to be powerless, to lose control of the narrative you've so carefully built." He hesitated. "You're not planning to go public with this, are you? It would ruin both of us." Sylvia smirked. "Perhaps I'll keep it to myself. For now. But you'll move out today. I've already spoken to a lawyer. Our divorce will be swift, and I'll make sure everyone knows exactly why." Richard's shoulders sagged, defeat etched across his face. "You're not even going to try to work through this? Work through it?" Sylvia repeated, her voice thick with disbelief. "You don't work through a betrayal like this, Richard. You end it." He left without another word, the door clicking shut behind him. Sylvia sat back down, her hands trembling. The rage that had carried her this far began to wane, replaced by a deep ache. But she refused to let it consume her. Later that day, she met with her lawyer, her resolve unshaken. Evelyn, too, had attempted to contact her, leaving voicemail after voicemail, but Sylvia deleted each one without listening. By the end of the week, Sylvia had filed for divorce, blocked Evelyn from every avenue of communication, and arranged for her own private investigator to ensure no further surprises awaited her. She attended charity functions and social gatherings, holding her head high as whispers of the scandal followed her like shadows. In the weeks that followed, Richard tried to salvage what he could, but the damage was done. Evelyn's name was tarnished, her medical practice losing clients as rumors of the affair spread. Richard moved into a modest apartment. His career stalled as colleagues distanced themselves from the controversy. As for Sylvia, she rebuilt her life piece by piece. The betrayal left scars, but it also revealed her strength. She became a symbol of resilience in her social circle, the woman who had faced the ultimate humiliation and emerged stronger. She would never forget the pain, but she vowed it would not define her. Instead, she embraced her newfound freedom, determined to live life on her own terms, and never again let anyone take her trust for granted. Months passed, and the scandal began to fade from the forefront of gossip circles, replaced by fresher drama. But for Sylvia, the echoes of betrayal lingered, shaping her days in unexpected ways. She threw herself into her work, expanding her philanthropic efforts and forging new connections outside the circles she once shared with Richard and Evelyn. One evening, while attending a charity auction, Sylvia found herself in conversation with a woman named Marissa. She was a journalist with a reputation for uncovering hidden truths, her sharp wit and piercing gaze making her both captivating and intimidating. "I've heard bits about what happened," Marissa said cautiously, as the two women shared a glass of wine in a quiet corner. "But not the whole story. You seem remarkably composed for someone who's been through so much." Sylvia smiled faintly, swirling her wine. "Composure isn't the same as peace, Marissa. It's just strategy." Marissa leaned closer, intrigued. "Strategy? Care to elaborate?" Sylvia hesitated, then made a decision. Something about Marissa felt trustworthy. Perhaps because she had no ties to Sylvia's old life. Let's just say I've been busy ensuring Richard and Evelyn understand that actions have consequences. Marissa raised an eyebrow. Consequences? That sounds interesting. Sylvia set her glass down and leaned in. It's not just about revenge, Marissa. It's about accountability. People like them, they count on others staying silent. But silence enables betrayal. The journalist's curiosity was piqued. Are you saying you've done more than file for divorce? Sylvia's lips curved into a mysterious smile. I've ensured their fall from grace was thorough. Richard's firm lost a major client last month, after they received some information about his ethical lapses. And Evelyn? Well, let's just say her license to practice medicine is under review. Marissa blinked, impressed. You've been busy. Sylvia tilted her head, her smile never wavering. It's not about being vindictive. It's about justice. They thought they could humiliate me, deceive me, and walk away unscathed. I've simply reminded them that the world doesn't work that way. Marissa nodded slowly. And now? Are you done? Or is there more? Sylvia sipped her wine, considering the question. I don't know. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm in control of my life. I'm not sure I'm ready to stop. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, but Marissa left the event that night with a story brewing in her mind. Sylvia, for her part, felt a strange sense of satisfaction. She had weathered the storm and emerged stronger, her resolve tempered by fire. As she left the auction, stepping into the cool night air, she paused to look up at the stars. For the first time in months, she felt something close to contentment. She wasn't the woman she had been before the betrayal, but she was someone new, someone who refused to be a victim. And as for Richard and Evelyn, their lives continued to unravel in ways they couldn't fully trace back to Sylvia, but the specter of her presence loomed large. They would never know peace, just as they had robbed her of it. Sylvia walked to her car, her heels clicking against the pavement, her head held high. The future was uncertain, but she welcomed it. Whatever came next, she would face it on her terms, and she would never ever be blindsided again. Weeks turned into months, and Sylvia's transformation from betrayed wife to a formidable figure of resolve became a quiet legend among those who had witnessed her fall and rise. But beneath her polished exterior, she felt a new sense of purpose growing. A need not only to rebuild her life, but to protect others from similar betrayals. She founded an organization called Foris, a private initiative dedicated to supporting individuals navigating the aftermath of personal and professional betrayals. The organization offered legal aid, psychological counseling, and investigative services. It quickly gained traction, attracting high-profile donors and clients who sought refuge in Sylvia's tenacity. One afternoon, as Sylvia reviewed a proposal in her sleek new office, her assistant knocked softly on the door. Mrs. Caldwell, there's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she insists it's urgent. Sylvia glanced at her schedule. The day was tightly packed, but something in her assistant's tone gave her pause. Send her in. The door opened, and Evelyn Hart stepped inside, her face pale and drawn. She was no longer the composed, confident Dr. Sylvia once knew. Her expensive clothes hung awkwardly, as if even they had lost their purpose. Sylvia, Evelyn began, her voice trembling. I didn't know where else to turn. Sylvia leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. Evelyn, I'm surprised to see you. I would have thought our last encounter was final. Evelyn sat in the chair opposite Sylvia's desk, wringing her hands. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I need your help. Sylvia raised an eyebrow, her voice cool. Help? From me? Evelyn nodded, tears welling in her eyes. It's about Richard. Sylvia's gaze hardened. You'll understand if I'm not particularly inclined to discuss Richard. Evelyn shook her head. You don't understand. After everything fell apart, I tried to cut ties with him. I thought if I distanced myself, I could salvage what was left of my life. But he's dangerous, Sylvia. Sylvia's posture stiffened. Dangerous? In what way? Evelyn leaned forward, desperation etched into her features. He's been blackmailing me, threatening to expose private information about me and my patients if I don't help him recover from his losses. He blames me for everything that's happened. Sylvia considered this. A part of her wanted to dismiss Evelyn outright, to send her away and leave her to the chaos she had helped create. But another part, the part that had endured Richard's manipulations firsthand, felt a flicker of recognition in Evelyn's fear. "You made your choices, Evelyn," Sylvia said, her voice even. "Why should I involve myself in your mess?" Evelyn's voice cracked. "Because he's worse than either of us realized. You've already seen how far he's willing to go. If you don't stop him now, he'll hurt more people." Sylvia studied Evelyn for a long moment, weighing her words. The idea of stepping back into the storm she had so carefully navigated away from was repellent. But if Richard truly posed a threat beyond their personal lives, could she ignore it? "I'll consider it," Sylvia said finally, her tone measured. "But make no mistake, Evelyn, this isn't about you. It's about ensuring no one else becomes a victim of his lies." Evelyn nodded, relief washing over her face. "Thank you, Sylvia. I'll do whatever you need." Sylvia rose, signaling the conversation was over. "Don't thank me yet. If I decide to act, it'll be on my terms. And Evelyn, don't mistake this for forgiveness. Some wounds don't heal." As Evelyn left, Sylvia returned to her desk, her mind already racing. She would need to tread carefully, but one thing was certain. If Richard thought he could manipulate his way out of this, he had underestimated her once again. This time, Sylvia would not only defend herself. She would ensure that Richard's days of deceit and destruction came to an irrevocable end. Sylvia's decision to confront Richard was not made lightly. She knew from experience that he thrived on manipulation and charm, his ability to twist truths into weapons, making him a formidable opponent. But this time, Sylvia wasn't the same woman he had once deceived. She was stronger, more calculating, and unafraid to take control. The first step was gathering intelligence. Sylvia reached out to her private investigator, a shrewd and discreet woman named Nadine, who had proven invaluable during the divorce. Within days, Nadine provided a detailed dossier on Richard's recent activities. His finances were in shambles, his business connections fraying. But what caught Sylvia's attention was a string of shadowy dealings with unscrupulous figures, businessmen with a reputation for skirting the law. "He's desperate," Nadine explained during a meeting in Sylvia's office. "He's trying to secure funding to rebuild his firm, but the people he's dealing with aren't the type you want to owe favors to." Sylvia leaned back in her chair, her mind churning. "And Evelyn? Has he made any specific threats against her?" Nadine nodded. "From what I've uncovered, he's holding confidential patient records over her head. If those were leaked, her reputation and what's left of her career would be destroyed." Sylvia tapped her fingers on the desk, the beginnings of a plan taking shape. "We need to neutralize him, not just for Evelyn's sake, but to stop him from dragging anyone else down with him." Nadine smirked. "I thought you might say that. I've already started laying groundwork." The confrontation was set for a high-stakes business luncheon Richard was attending at an exclusive club. Sylvia arrived unannounced, her entrance turning heads as her tailored black suit and sharp heels exuded power. Richard was seated at a table near the center of the room, surrounded by potential investors. His face paled as he saw her approaching. "Sylvia," he began, forcing a smile as he rose to greet her. "This is unexpected." She didn't return the pleasantry. "A word, Richard." Now, the guests at his table exchanged curious glances, sensing the tension. Richard hesitated, but Sylvia's unwavering stare left him no choice. He excused himself and followed her to a private lounge nearby. As the door closed behind them, Sylvia turned to face him. "I've given you too much leeway, Richard. That ends now." He chuckled nervously, feigning nonchalance. "I'm not sure what you mean." Sylvia stepped closer, her voice low and cutting. "Don't insult me. I know about your dealings, your threats against Evelyn, and your pathetic attempts to claw your way back to the top." Richard's mask of composure slipped, his jaw tightening. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I know everything," Sylvia retorted, her tone icy. She pulled a folder from her bag and dropped it onto the coffee table between them. Your finances, your shady partnerships, the leverage you're holding over Evelyn. It's all there. Richard's eyes darted to the folder, but he didn't reach for it. So what? You're here to gloat? No, Sylvia said sharply. I'm here to end this. You're going to withdraw from your current deals, return everything you've taken from Evelyn, and disappear from our lives. If you don't, I'll make sure every one of your dirty secrets is laid bare. His face twisted with anger. You wouldn't dare. Sylvia leaned in, her voice a venomous whisper. Try me. You know what I'm capable of now. The only reason you're still standing is because I allowed it. Cross me again, and you won't have anything left. Not your reputation, not your career, not even your freedom. Richard's bravado faltered, the weight of her words sinking in. He knew she wasn't bluffing. What's your game, Sylvia? He asked finally, his voice hollow. Why not just destroy me outright? Sylvia straightened, her gaze unwavering. 'Cause I'm not like you, Richard. I don't destroy for sport, but I will protect what's mine and ensure you never hurt anyone again. Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked out, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Behind her, Richard sank into a chair, the fight draining from him as he realized he was outmatched. In the weeks that followed, Richard quietly withdrew from his business ventures and ceased all contact with Evelyn. Nadine confirmed that he had sold his remaining assets and moved to a remote location, far from the social circles he once dominated. Evelyn, while shaken, began to rebuild her life under Sylvia's watchful eye. Foris continued to grow, its influence expanding as Sylvia's story inspired others to stand up against betrayal and manipulation. Sylvia, for her part, felt a sense of closure. She hadn't just survived Richard's betrayal. She had risen above it, stronger and more determined than ever. And now, with her past firmly behind her, she was ready to embrace the future on her terms. For the first time in a long time, Sylvia Caldwell felt truly free. Sylvia's victory over Richard marked the end of a chapter, but not the conclusion of her journey. In the aftermath, she found herself reflecting not just on her triumph, but on the path she had taken to get there. The experience had changed her in ways she was only beginning to understand, and as she stood on the precipice of a new life, she realized there was still more to uncover, both about herself and the world around her. Foris continued to flourish, its reputation as a haven for the wronged spreading far and wide. But with growth came new challenges. One day, as Sylvia reviewed the latest case intake reports, Nadine entered her office with an unusually grim expression. We've got a problem, Nadine said, closing the door behind her. Sylvia set down her pen, her attention sharpening. What kind of problem? Nadine handed her a file. A potential client came to us with this. It's not a typical betrayal case. It's bigger. Sylvia opened the file, her eyes scanning the pages. The client, a mid-level executive at a major corporation, had uncovered evidence of corruption within the company, embezzlement, fraud, and even ties to organized crime. The whistleblower's life was now in danger, and they had turned to Foris for help. Sylvia frowned, her instincts kicking in. This is outside our usual scope. I know, Nadine admitted, but the client was adamant. They said we were the only ones they could trust. Sylvia closed the file and leaned back in her chair, weighing the risks. Foris had built its reputation on exposing personal betrayals, not dismantling criminal enterprises. But the stakes in this case were higher than anything they'd faced before, and the potential consequences, both for the whistleblower and Foris, were immense. Do we have confirmation on the allegations? Sylvia asked. Nadine nodded. Preliminary checks support their claims. If we take this on, it won't just be about protecting the client. We'll be going up against powerful people with a lot to lose. Sylvia's mind raced. She had always believed in fighting for justice, but this case was a leap into uncharted territory. It was dangerous, unpredictable, and exactly the kind of challenge she felt ready to face. Set up a meeting with the client, she said finally. If their story checks out, we'll take the case. But I want a full risk assessment before we proceed. Nadine nodded, a flicker of admiration in her eyes. Understood. The meeting took place in a secure location, far from the prying eyes of corporate spies or criminal informants. The whistleblower, a nervous man in his 30s named Eric, detailed his findings with a mixture of fear and determination. His evidence was damning. Financial records, internal memos, and even covertly recorded conversations implicating several high-ranking executives. "They'll kill me if they find out I came to you," Eric said, his hands trembling as he pushed a USB drive across the table. "But I couldn't live with myself if I stayed silent." Sylvia studied him, her expression unreadable. She saw echoes of herself in his desperation. A person backed into a corner, seeking a way out. "You've done the right thing," she said, her voice steady. "We'll protect you, and we'll make sure the truth comes to light." Eric looked at her, a flicker of hope breaking through his fear. "You mean it?" "I do," Sylvia said firmly. "But you need to understand, this won't be easy. They'll fight back, and it will get ugly. Are you prepared for that?" He hesitated, then nodded. "I've come this far. I'm ready." Sylvia stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "Good. Then let's get to work." The case proved to be the most complex and perilous endeavor Sylvia had ever undertaken. As she and her team unraveled the web of corruption, they faced mounting threats. Anonymous warnings, attempted break-ins at the Fortis office, and even a car tailing Nadine late one night. Despite the danger, Sylvia remained resolute. She had fought her way out of darkness before, and she would do it again. But this time, it wasn't just her own survival at stake. It was a battle for justice, for truth, and for those who couldn't fight for themselves. And as the pieces fell into place, exposing the full extent of the conspiracy, Sylvia realized something profound. Her journey had never been about revenge. It had always been about finding her purpose. By the time the dust settled and the perpetrators were brought to justice, Fortis had cemented its place not just as a sanctuary for the wronged, but as a force for change. Sylvia stood at the helm, her past betrayals now distant memories, her future a blank canvas waiting to be filled. For the first time, she felt not just free, but truly unstoppable. Months after the high-profile takedown of the corrupt corporate syndicate, Sylvia Caldwell found herself in a rare moment of solitude. The world around her had grown louder with recognition and accolades, yet within her, a quiet transformation had taken root. She wasn't simply the architect of Fortis or a survivor of personal betrayal. She had become something more, a force of reckoning. One crisp evening, Sylvia walked through the gardens of her estate, the setting sun casting long shadows across the manicured paths. She paused by a marble bench overlooking a pond, her reflection rippling in the water. Her thoughts wandered to the path that had brought her here, the betrayals, the battles, the triumphs, and the people she had encountered along the way. The whistleblower, Eric, was now living under a new identity, safe and rebuilding his life. Nadine had become her most trusted confidant, their partnership evolving into a seamless dance of intellect and strategy. And Evelyn? She had faded into the background, her once prominent life now subdued. Sylvia hadn't seen her since the confrontation with Richard, but she had heard through mutual acquaintances that Evelyn was quietly practicing medicine again in a small, unassuming clinic. Richard, on the other hand, had vanished entirely. Nadine had tracked him to a remote island in the Mediterranean, where he was reportedly living a reclusive existence, his charm and ambition wasted on empty shores. Sylvia had no desire to revisit him. He was a chapter she had firmly closed. Yet despite the resolution of so many threads, Sylvia felt the pull of something unfinished. Fortis had grown into a formidable entity, but its success brought new complexities. Cases now came from around the globe, each one more tangled, more dangerous than the last. Sylvia thrived on the challenge, but she also recognized the toll it took on her and her team. One evening, Nadine arrived unannounced at Sylvia's estate, carrying a slim envelope. "This came to the office," Nadine said, handing it over. No return address, but it was marked urgent. Sylvia opened it carefully, her practiced hands unfolding the single sheet of paper inside. The message was handwritten, the ink smudged in places. Asterisk Sylvia, you don't know me, but I know you. Your work has changed lives, mine included. But there's more to be done. The people you've fought so far are just the beginning. If you're ready to go deeper, meet me at the address below. Midnight. No phones. Come alone. The note ended with an address in a part of the city Sylvia rarely visited. She read it twice, her instincts firing on all cylinders. A trap? Perhaps. But there was something compelling in the tone. An urgency she couldn't ignore. Are you going? Nadine asked, her voice laced with concern. Sylvia folded the note and slipped it into her pocket. I am. At midnight, Sylvia arrived at the address, a nondescript warehouse on the city's outskirts. The area was silent, the hum of distant traffic the only sound. She approached cautiously, her sharp eyes scanning for signs of trouble. Inside, the warehouse was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of oil and dust. A figure stepped out of the shadows, a woman, tall and commanding, with an air of quiet authority. She wore a sleek black suit, her posture rigid but not unfriendly. Miss Caldwell, the woman said, her voice smooth and precise. Thank you for coming. Sylvia tilted her head, her expression guarded. Who are you, and why am I here? The woman stepped closer, extending a hand. My name is Elena. I represent a collective, an alliance of individuals who, like you, have dedicated their lives to exposing corruption and fighting injustice. We've been watching your work. Sylvia crossed her arms, her gaze unyielding. And what do you want from me? Elena smiled faintly. To join us. What you've done with Fortis is impressive, but there's a larger fight. One that requires resources, connections, and, above all, discretion. We believe you're uniquely qualified to be part of it. Sylvia studied Elena, her mind racing. The offer was intriguing, but it came with questions and risks. What kind of fight? Elena's smile faded, her tone turning serious. The kind that doesn't end with one corrupt corporation or one deceitful spouse. We're talking about systemic change. Global networks of exploitation, power structures that thrive on silence. You've seen the edges of it. We want to take you to the heart. Sylvia was silent for a moment, weighing the gravity of the words. She had built her life around the idea of justice, but this was something else entirely. Finally, she extended her hand. Tell me more. Elena's grip was firm, her smile returning. Welcome to the next level, Ms. Caldwell. As the two women began to talk, the future stretched before Sylvia. Unpredictable, dangerous, and alive with possibility. The room where Sylvia sat with Elena had the faint hum of possibility in the air, the kind that prickled the skin and sharpened the senses. Elena spoke with precision, outlining a network of operatives, whistleblowers, and covert agents scattered across the globe. Their mission was simple yet daunting. Dismantle power structures that thrived on corruption, oppression, and deceit. Sylvia listened intently, her mind a flurry of questions and calculations. This wasn't just another case. It was an invitation into a shadow world where justice wasn't merely sought but crafted in silence and subterfuge. Why me? Sylvia asked finally, her tone skeptical. Surely there are others more suited to this kind of work. Elena's smile was faint but genuine. Because you understand betrayal at its core. You've proven you can outthink and outmaneuver those who believe themselves untouchable. And most importantly, you've done it on your own terms. Sylvia sat back, absorbing the weight of the offer. This wasn't a path she had envisioned, but it felt like the inevitable evolution of everything she had become. The Sylvia Caldwell of a year ago might have balked at the danger, but the woman she was now felt only a simmering anticipation. What happens if I say yes? Sylvia asked. You'll receive access to resources, intelligence, and allies that operate outside traditional systems, Elena replied. But there's no turning back. Once you're in, you're part of the fight for as long as it takes. Sylvia nodded slowly, her decision already forming in her mind. Then I'm in. In the weeks that followed, Sylvia's life shifted in ways she hadn't anticipated. Elena's collective, known only as the Vanguard, operated with precision and secrecy. Sylvia was introduced to a network of operatives, each with their own expertise. A data analyst who could unearth secrets buried in encrypted servers, a former journalist who specialized in exposing conspiracies, and a former intelligence officer with a knack for crafting airtight plans. Together, they tackled their first mission, dismantling a trafficking ring hidden behind a global logistics company. The operation tested Sylvia's resolve and resourcefulness, but her ability to think 3 steps ahead proved invaluable. By the end, dozens of victims had been freed, and the organization's leaders were facing international prosecution. Through it all, Sylvia felt a renewed sense of purpose. Each case brought new challenges and risks, but also the satisfaction of knowing she was part of something larger than herself. The betrayal that had once defined her was no longer a weight. Now, it was her greatest weapon. 1 year after joining the vanguard, Sylvia stood on a rooftop overlooking the city, the lights below shimmering like a sea of possibilities. Nadine joined her, holding 2 glasses of champagne. "You've come a long way," Nadine said, handing her a glass. Sylvia smiled, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "We both have." Nadine raised her glass. "To Fortis, to the vanguard, and to Sylvia Caldwell, the woman who turned betrayal into power." Sylvia clinked her glass against Nadine's, the sound clear and sharp against the night. "To the fight." As they drank, Sylvia felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The path ahead would be fraught with danger, but she was no longer afraid. She had found her calling, her strength, and her purpose. And for the first time in her life, Sylvia Caldwell felt truly unstoppable.